The Blade of Erythra. The sword had stood in the stone for millennia, its hilt carved from iridescent crystal, and its blade forged from a metal that shimmered like liquid light. It rested in the heart of the Valley of Erythra, a place so sacred that even the bravest warriors among the alien races who inhabited the planet dared not tread lightly. The legend was known across the galaxy. The one who wields the Blade of Erythra will command the fate of worlds. Pilgrims from countless alien species traveled light years to try their hand. None succeeded. The blade wouldn't budge. For centuries, it became a ritual of futility, a proving ground where strength, intelligence, and even the most advanced alien technologies failed. And then came the human. Dr. Maya Harper wasn't a warrior, nor a treasure seeker. She was an archaeologist, part of the first Terran delegation to the galactic community. To the other species, humans were a curiosity, a fledgling race with little to offer besides their audacity and determination. Maya wasn't even supposed to be at the Valley of Erythra. She had been cataloging ruins nearby when her guide, a towering, four-armed alien named Kelt, mentioned the legend in passing. "Why hasn't anyone lifted it?" Maya asked. Kelt's four eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture of bemused exasperation. "The blade is bonded to the ancient energies of the planet. Strength alone is useless. Only one aligned with its essence could ever hope to lift it." Maya's curiosity was piqued. She convinced Kelt to take her there, despite his warnings. "You'll be laughed at," he said, his voice a rumble like distant thunder. "Wouldn't be the first time," she replied with a grin. The valley was eerily quiet. The air shimmered faintly, heavy with unspoken power. A small crowd of aliens had gathered, watching as yet another warrior, a hulking, insectoid creature twice Maya's height, failed to lift the blade. When Maya approached the sword, murmurs rippled through the crowd. A human? What could she possibly do? She ignored them. Her focus was on the sword itself. Up close, it was even more beautiful, its crystalline hilt warm to the touch. Carvings covered the stone it rested in, symbols that seemed to pulse faintly, almost like they were alive. Maya knelt to examine the carvings. Her fingers traced the patterns, her mind racing. She recognized some of the symbols, fragments of a lost language she had studied in the ruins nearby. They spoke of unity, balance, and adaptability. She stood, her heart pounding. "It's not about strength," she whispered. "It's about harmony." Maya placed her hands on the hilt. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd began to jeer. Then the ground beneath her feet trembled. Light flared from the carvings, racing up the blade and into her arms. Maya felt a strange sensation, a flood of emotions and memories that weren't her own. She saw the rise and fall of ancient civilizations, felt the weight of their hopes and despair. And then she understood. The sword wasn't a test of strength or dominance. It was a bridge, a connection to the essence of Erythra itself. And humans, with their unique blend of resilience and adaptability, were the perfect match. With a sharp, resonant crack, the sword came free. The crowd fell silent, their disbelief palpable. Maya held the blade of Erythra high, its light illuminating the valley. What happened next would change the galaxy forever. The blade was more than a weapon. It was a key, unlocking secrets that had been lost for eons. Maya became an unlikely hero, a human thrust into a role she never asked for but couldn't refuse. And as the stars looked on, one thing became clear. Sometimes, the smallest and most unassuming beings are the ones who change the course of history. Chapter 1. The Sword in the Stone. The twin suns of Proxima Cor burned high above the jagged purple mountains, casting an eerie glow over the valley below. The planet was an alien paradise, but its beauty was matched only by its many dangers. The valley's centerpiece, a colossal sword embedded in an ancient stone, was a relic from a bygone age. Its blade shimmered unnaturally, inscribed with cryptic glyphs that no scholar, human or alien, had been able to decipher. For centuries, the sword had stood untouched. Legend said it was a weapon forged by the ancients, a race so advanced that even the most evolved species in the galaxy regarded them as gods. The ancients had vanished eons ago, leaving behind relics like the sword that carried both awe and mystery. The Clitians, a proud and militaristic alien race, had claimed the valley as a sacred site. Every few years, they held a ceremonial trial, inviting challengers from across the galaxy to attempt to pull the sword free. None ever succeeded. The Clitians' best warriors had failed. Even the Garathians, known for their brute strength, had walked away in shame. Today, the valley was teeming with spectators. Throngs of aliens from dozens of worlds had gathered to witness the latest attempt. Among them was a human named Max Carter, an unassuming pilot who had stumbled into the competition almost by accident. His small cargo ship had crash-landed on Proxima Core weeks earlier, leaving him stranded and desperate for work. When he heard about the trial, he figured the spectacle might at least be worth watching. The Clitian High Chancellor, a towering figure with crimson scales and gleaming ceremonial armor, raised her staff to silence the crowd. "Behold, the blade of eternity," she declared in a booming voice. "Let any who dare step forward. Prove your worth, or be remembered as a fool." One by one, challengers approached the sword. A towering Garathian heaved with all 6 arms, veins bulging under his green skin, but the sword didn't budge. A sleek Gervani, a species known for their psychic abilities, tried to lift it using sheer mental force. The blade remained unmoved. Each failure added to the mounting tension. Finally, it was Max's turn. He hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was laughing. They weren't. Most were too busy gawking at the other challengers. Taking a deep breath, he stepped up to the sword. He wasn't strong, psychic, or particularly heroic. He was just a guy who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Placing his hands on the hilt, Max felt an odd sensation, like a low hum vibrating through his bones. The crowd's murmur faded as he tightened his grip. He pulled, expecting the same result as the others. But the sword moved. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The blade slid out of the stone as if it had been waiting for him. When he held it aloft, the glyphs along the blade ignited in a brilliant blue light. The hum grew louder, resonating in harmony with his heartbeat. Max's mind flooded with strange images, a galaxy engulfed in flames, an ancient army, and a voice whispering, "It begins." The High Chancellor's jaw dropped. "Impossible," she muttered. Max lowered the sword, looking at it in disbelief. Does this mean I win?" he asked. No one answered. The silence was shattered by a deafening roar as the ground trembled. From the stone where the sword had rested, cracks spread outward, releasing a pulse of energy that knocked everyone to the ground. The valley erupted into chaos as something ancient began to stir. Chapter 2. Chosen by the Blade. Max stumbled back, the sword still clutched in his hands. The ground beneath the stone crumbled away, revealing an enormous, glowing fissure. From its depths, a shadowy figure emerged. It was humanoid but impossibly tall, with glowing eyes that radiated malice. "The Guardian," someone whispered in terror. The creature stepped forward, its voice a guttural rumble that reverberated through the valley. "Who dares disturb the blade of eternity?" Max's heart pounded. He turned to the High Chancellor, who was struggling to her feet. "What is that thing?" he shouted. "The Guardian," she repeated, her voice trembling. "It's the blade's protector. It will judge you." The Guardian's gaze locked onto Max. "You are unworthy," it growled. Raising a massive arm, it struck. Max barely had time to react before the sword in his hand moved on its own, deflecting the blow with a burst of light. The force sent him sprawling, but he was unharmed. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Max scrambled to his feet. "Look, I didn't ask for this," he yelled at the Guardian. "I just wanted to see what would happen." The Guardian ignored his protests, advancing with deliberate steps. The sword vibrated in his hand, guiding him. Despite his lack of training, Max found himself moving with surprising agility, dodging the Guardian's attacks and striking back with flashes of energy. "He's bonded with it," the High Chancellor whispered to her advisors. "The blade, it chose him." "But why?" one of them asked. He's just a human. The Chancellor's expression darkened. That's what we must find out. As the battle raged, Max felt the sword's power surging through him. He wasn't just wielding it, it was guiding him, filling his mind with knowledge he didn't understand. With a final, desperate swing, he struck the Guardian's chest. The creature let out a deafening roar before collapsing into a cloud of shadow that dissipated into the wind. The valley fell silent once more. Max stood there, panting, as the sword's glow dimmed slightly. He turned to the crowd, holding it up. So, what now? The High Chancellor stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear. Now, human, she said, you must face the destiny the blade has chosen for you. Max groaned. Great. Just what I needed. Chapter 3. The Challenge. The alien crowd murmured in disbelief, their words a strange symphony of clicks, hums, and guttural tones. Yara, the human envoy, stood before the ancient sword. She adjusted her gloves and gazed at the impossibly massive blade embedded in the obsidian pedestal. Its hilt gleamed with pulsating light, alive and yet still. This is ridiculous, Yara muttered, looking over her shoulder at Professor Tkar, her Terrasian guide. The blade of Ethris is a sacred relic, Tkar intoned, his tentacle-like fingers trembling. It has judged countless species over millennia. All have failed to wield its power. Are you certain you wish to humiliate yourself? Yara smirked. You brought me here, remember? You think humans are primitive. Maybe you're right, but there's only one way to find out. The elders of the Xyrix Council sat high above the crowd, their elongated necks craning to observe. The eldest of them, Cyrex, spoke with a booming voice, human. You presume to test yourself against the blade of Ethris? Even the mightiest among us have fallen short. What gives you such audacities? Yara raised an eyebrow. Honestly? Curiosity. Maybe a little stubbornness, too. The crowd erupted in derisive laughter. But Yara was unbothered. She had learned long ago that confidence was as much a weapon as strength. As she stepped toward the pedestal, the atmosphere shifted. A strange, thrumming energy buzzed through the air, growing stronger with every step. Her heart pounded. She reached out, her fingers brushing the hilt of the sword. A jolt of energy surged through her body, and for a moment, her vision blurred. Whispers, unintelligible yet urgent, filled her mind. Do you hear that? She asked, her voice strained. Hear what? Tkar replied, concern etched on his face. Ignoring him, Yara gripped the hilt with both hands. The sword resisted her pull, feeling as though it weighed more than a mountain. But Yara didn't let go. She gritted her teeth, muscles trembling, and pulled with everything she had. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into a single, distinct word. Worthy. With a deafening crack, the sword came free. Gasps echoed through the arena. The blade of Ethris shimmered, its light intensifying until the crowd shielded their eyes. Yara stood there, holding the massive weapon as though it weighed nothing. For the first time in centuries, the blade had chosen a wielder. Chapter 4. The Trial. The world seemed to hold its breath as Yara raised the blade. It was heavier than it looked, yet its balance felt perfect in her hands. The blade emitted a low hum, vibrating with an almost sentient awareness. Impossible, Tkar whispered, his usually stoic face a mask of astonishment. The Xyrix elders leaned forward, their glowing eyes fixed on Yara. Human, Cyrex boomed, his voice tinged with both awe and suspicion. The blade of Ethris has accepted you, but wielding it is only the beginning. Are you prepared for the trials? Trial? Yara echoed, frowning. Tkar stepped forward hastily. Yara, this is not just a ceremonial weapon. The trial of Ethris is a gauntlet that tests the soul of the wielder. No one has ever survived it. Great, Yara muttered. You guys could have mentioned that earlier. Before she could argue further, the sword's hum intensified. The ground beneath her feet cracked and split, revealing a swirling vortex of light and shadow. Yara barely had time to shout before she was pulled into it. Yara landed hard on a rocky surface. She groaned, pushing herself to her feet, and surveyed her surroundings. She was no longer in the arena. Instead, she stood in a barren wasteland under a blood-red sky. Jagged mountains loomed in the distance, and the air smelled of sulfur and ash. "Okay," she muttered, gripping the sword tightly. "This is fine. Totally fine." The ground rumbled. From the shadows emerged a massive beast, its body a grotesque fusion of stone and flesh. Its glowing eyes locked onto Yara, and it let out an earth-shaking roar. The whispers returned, this time louder and more urgent. "Prove your worth," they said. "Face the beast." Yara took a deep breath.
"Right."
"Prove my worth."
"Sure."
No pressure. The beast charged, and Yara barely had time to dodge. She rolled to the side, the sword's weight shifting effortlessly in her hands as though guiding her movements. The fight was brutal. The beast's claws tore through the air, and its roars shook the ground. But with every strike of the sword, Yara felt stronger, faster. The blade glowed brighter with each blow, until it blazed like a star. Finally, with a triumphant cry, Yara drove the sword into the beast's heart. The creature let out a final, anguished roar before crumbling into dust. The wasteland began to dissolve, the red sky giving way to brilliant white light. The whispers spoke one last time. "You are worthy." The true wielder of Ethris. When Yara opened her eyes, she was back in the arena. The crowd was silent, their faces a mixture of fear and reverence. The Xyrix elders stood, bowing their heads. Cyrex spoke. "Human, you have passed the trial of Ethris. The blade is yours. But with it comes great responsibility." Yara looked down at the sword in her hands. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I figured